Going live. So Break the Trance is the title of the Dharma talk. And the idea is not that you can cut into it and stop it just by seeing it, that it is a trance or some kind of spell or some kind of myopia you have about your own emotions, thought patterns, and so on. I sometimes say, don't believe it, don't disbelieve it, don't look away. Don't do anything with it. That's hard to do because there's always this slight magnetism that is fueled by fear of being wrong, fear of making a mistake, some kind of embarrassment. Embarrassment is just, the downside of embarrassment doesn't feel very good, but the upside of embarrassment, if you see that is an indication that there's some quality of self-centeredness that doesn't feel just right. It's the way we kind of take our own inventory. And I would say, don't do anything with that. Don't stop it. Don't start it. Don't stop it. Don't support it. Don't disregard it. The three poisons: passion, aggression, and ignorance. But break the spell. You have to see that you're in a spell. You have to see that you're entrained or in a trance about your mind, about your ideas, about your thought patterns. We can't go the other way and say, oh, I don't believe that. That's just as bad. It's not just as bad. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's the relative way of seeing non-duality. The ultimate way of seeing non-duality is just that. It's ultimate. So you don't really see anything. If you see something, that's confusion. And I don't mean you don't see the table or see the rug or see that. I'm saying the very simple appearance of things is also not separate. But then what do? We immediately come to a conclusion about it, which creates the entrainment that causes us to go on and on. At war with ourselves, at war with others, and the dependent origination that is arising in your mind stream, in your thought patterns, in your life is very clear as it is, but very confusing as it appears. So as it appears means as you're seeing it, viewing it, is you have ideas about it. You actually abandon your life moment by moment and want something else. So it seems necessary to actually look at the attachment we have to whatever we think or whatever whatever conclusion we come to. Then we do something with that, and then we do something else, and we turn it this way and turn it that way. Sometimes called worrying. We worry about everything. We jump this way, jump that way. It seems that the only way that I know of, based on what I've been looking at for quite a while, is to sit down, hold still, and do nothing but watch the momentum of I'm going to say it this way, the crazy mind, our crazy passion, aggression, ignorance. Just watch the momentum. If you don't fuel it, it can't keep going. The only way you can fuel it, as far as I know, is to grasp it, reject it, or to turn away or distract yourself. If you do one of those three, then you will miss your fundamental nature, which is not separate from anything. There isn't anyone. But we continually use the pronouns. Well, I like this, I don't like that. Well, as for me, I think this is better or that's better. It's not that is something you shouldn't do. You shouldn't stop doing that necessarily, but you could be aware of that and see that why sometimes Buddhism is called the middle way, because not too tight, not too loose. Some attachment, but not going overboard to squeeze some kind of happiness out of relative truth. It won't happen. Depending on your karma, it might come up temporarily that if you do this and do that, you're suddenly very happy. You get this, with this partner or this kind of job or this kind of thing. Temporarily, that's probably going to work, but nothing lasts. Everything is impermanent. That looks like something. That looks like something arising, something going away, something arising, something going away. And we get magnetized, we get hypnotized, we get entrained into that circularity of our mind, and we find ourselves chasing after that, running away from that, and avoiding that. It seems. The only way, it seems here, is that the only way we can come to some kind of deep understanding of what this is to sit down, hold still, and watch the movement without adding, watch the movement without subtracting, watch the movement without dividing or separating ourselves from it. Very simple math. Don't do it. When I say don't do it, the way that starts out is to see the way you can't help but come to conclusions about things. And the self-centered mind, the ego mind, gets its nourishment from that. It gets kind of empowered by having some successes. The two directions that those go in are hope and fear. So I'm not saying you shouldn't hope that your car doesn't run out of gas on the way to the store. So there's a little bit of that, but a little bit of fear is okay. We tend to overdo it and start to have that run our life instead of our clarity around what this is. At war, in a very subtle way, or we are at war with everything, or at peace with everything, which is equally more difficult to see because of the very nature of that concept, but it's still the case. Don't go to war, don't go to peace, do nothing. There isn't anything to do. If you think there is, then merry-go-round. It gets complicated because we're in relationship with other people, our family, our friends, our society, our sangha, our spiritual community, and there's all kinds of circularity going on there. Don't stop it, don't start it, don't do anything with it. Just observe it, just watch it. If you observe it, then you begin to see the way in which you begin to see firsthand the way in which you're attached to your ideas, your conclusions, your opinions, your beliefs. Seeing the attachment clearly, it breaks it. It breaks that entrainment or that hypnosis or that whatever the hell that is. It starts to slow down, and you don't even feel. Pardon me. You don't even feel like you're doing anything. You almost, if this turnabout at the basis of consciousness, called the Alaya Vijnana, the storehouse, if this comes about in your lifetime, you might feel like you don't deserve it, or you didn't really do anything for that to happen. You just stop getting in the way of your own Buddha nature. There's nothing to realize. Don't believe a word I say. Don't disbelieve it. Don't look away. You're here, so you could listen. Questions? Akram.
Is labeling something as awareness also an entrancement or trap?
Not necessarily. Just do it once. Don't make a career of it. In other words, don't become a great meditator. A person who's always aware of everything. Mm-hmm.
I mean, just you're caught in something and you're feeling overwhelmed and you feel like aggression or something, mm-hmm. and you say, I recognize that, and you don't do anything. Mm-hmm. Is that further confusion, or is that mm-hmm. okay just to rest there?
I wouldn't do any of that. There's a teaching that says rest in the nature of Alaya, which is, but Alaya is an intense concept, a rest in the nature of unborn awareness. This is part of the Lojong training coming out of Atisha's 7 points of mind training. Not against that, but you should actually, when I say you should, you're asking me, so I would say I wouldn't do much. I would do less than what if you're able to ask that question, then do less. Just back up just a little ways before you came to the conclusion you were asking me about. Makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
No, not at all.
That's progress, yes.
If that happens and the spell is broken, so to speak, why does it keep returning?
Fear, because the gradual slide into no self, which is a fundamental reality, that gradual slide is scary to the self-centeredness that wants to get back out of that cavern, because it imputes or believes or thinks that there's something to be lost. Nothing is threatened anywhere. Question? Questions? Yogado.
Do we have to be to the point where we think there's nothing to lose before we can realize no self?
It's something to contemplate or think about, but not necessarily to be concerned about, get to the point. of that. It's already the case. So getting to the point is more relativity in a more polished form of thinking process. You can't really figure this out or think your way into it. All you can do is see it. And you might have to look at the opposite, or look at the confusion, pardon me, look at the confusion for quite a long time without doing anything with it before it just collapses or it gets no more fuel. This is why we do sitting practice of meditation, shikantaza, sit down, hold still, sit in a symmetrical posture, watch what comes and goes without interfering. If it slows way down, fine. If it speeds way up, fine. Well,
I'm just wondering if our meditation is especially boring and there doesn't seem to be a lot of things happening, is that like unhelpful or?
No, it's fine. It could be a little bit different with each person, but basically the boredom is the downside is it feels boring, but the upside is that's a sign you're weaning yourself away from entertainment. So that entertainment could take the form of all kinds of things. So just a validation of you're the person who's really afraid, or you're the person who's really getting somewhere, or finally you're beginning to understand the nature of reality. Some other baloney. More? Sugar?
Sure. Does anything begin to replace that space that was there before the boredom showed up?
It isn't so much that something or phenomena starts to show up. It's just a more understanding about what phenomena are and who you are and what all of this is that is very difficult to put into words. As I sometimes say, if you understand what this is, there's a good likelihood you'll be tongue-tied or speechless because you won't be able to say what it is. Especially if there's no one there. There's no solid being there anymore. There's still a body mind wandering around doing things, perhaps. More, good question, more.
What you were just saying about being tongue-tied or speechless, I was kind of trying to formulate a question in regards to that, but I still don't know exactly how to turn it into a question. There are times, the deeper I get into my practice and the more I meditate, where simple conversations and social interactions just like seem so irrelevant and unnecessary to existence at all that I find myself becoming more and more reclusive and just not having anything to say to anyone.
What's your question?
How do you get past that? How do you keep that from turning into
Stop trying to get past it.
reaction?
Don't get past it. You don't have to get past anything. Misunderstanding, called spiritual materialism, trying to get somewhere. You're already somewhere. You don't have to get somewhere else. More? Less?
That's what I figured you'd say.
What?
Leave it alone.
Yeah, it's a way of talking about it. It isn't exactly that way. It's just a way of, and it could be show up differently for different people in different ways. Yes. Goes on.
You use the word trance. What's the difference between a trance and a dream?
Same thing. You're magnetized by that. Otherwise, you wouldn't dream. But it's not about getting rid of the dream or getting rid of the trance, even though I'm saying break that spell or break that trance. It's about seeing what it is. See, can you break it? Excuse me. Is there anyone to break it? Is there a trance in the first place? So it's always, as I say over and over, it's always about the awareness. Like here's the object that's arising, and in order to be viewed, it has to be in some kind of space. So just like in your mind, when you practice meditation, you become more and more, you could say, aware of how much room there is there for things come and go, thoughts come and go and come and go. Sometimes we interfere with them by being worried. Sometimes we grasp onto them. Sometimes we don't want to think. Sometimes we want more thinking. We always are never completely satisfied with what's happening. And even satisfaction is temporary. Wanting things to be different than they are.
When it seems like there's a dream or a hook on a personal narrative,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
can that ever be recognized as such without being laminated to it?
How's it look to you?
It seems like whatever looks like that is it's already happening before there's a comment on it, but it still feels like like a continuing storyline.
Mm-hmm. What's the question?
Is that a trance?
How's it look to you? That's a good response. Hakaran.
When we are dissatisfied with something, is it helpful to take the blame?
That's actually teaching. Drive all blames into one, or that it's always this direction rather than that direction. Even that isn't complete, but it's a way of practicing. As it's called the ability to respond, or responsibility. From the ultimate point of view, spoken in relative terms, you're responsible for everything. Everything's your fault. You're to blame for everything. You get credit for everything. You're not separate from this world. As a philosophical statement, it sounds kind of fancy, and you can, the ego mind can appropriate that and say, we're all one, or some kind of celebration of oneness, or we are the world, or something like this. Is a misunderstanding. Not that it isn't well-intentioned, of course it is, but it's based on relative truth, on trying to get relative truth to cooperate and get along. Not going to happen. It actually needs to be transcended. This is just a way station. It's like a huge ball of dirt called 6th grade. Well, maybe 7th grade. It's just a big school. Yes.
Way station, where is it that we are going?
Back to where we came from. You want more of a story than that? You just return to your original nature. We're away from it. We're in this mix called samsara, the spinning of life and death, up and down, back and forth, success and failure. And we believe it. We try to get away from some things and get to other things. Hakaran.
If we if we take the blame, but we're not a self, so how do we work with that?
It's much easier to be not a self. There isn't anyone, so you just, why wouldn't you take it? This is a personal way of, I don't particularly promote or teach Tonglen or sending and receiving while riding the breath, even though I practiced it quite a bit. I think rather than do a mechanical way like that in the Lojong practice is to do it just spontaneously in your life, to actually receive whatever's going wrong, take it. And send out good feelings, kindness, help, however you want to look at it, and do it situationally rather than just sit down and just, rather than just try to do it mechanically. I think that's just a misunderstanding, yes.
How do you talk about volition, like self-volition then?
Intention or volition?
Yeah, where does that fall into
Situation.
what this is?
So if you're no longer objecting to anything or agreeing with anything or ignoring anything, then the world is in its confusion is still going this way and that way, and the consciousness has still been downloaded into this particular lifetime or this one or any one, and then you work in concert with everything. There's still a sense of separation, and there's still not particularly a sense of being at one with anything. But yes, you just work in your relative situation. You just do whatever comes up without selecting, without cutting into anything, without doing anything at all. It won't feel like you're getting much credit. You won't be, people won't necessarily look at you and think of you as a saint. Choo-choo.
Are we all in the same basic trance or under the same spell?
Seems that way.
What is that?
Just passion, aggression, ignorance, desire, wanting things to be different than they are. Use the teaching of the Buddha. I'm not saying there aren't other teachings that might be more precise. Maybe there are. But if you just return to the basic teaching of the Buddha, everything is dependently arisen. There's not a separate thing anywhere. It sure looks like it, though, doesn't it? And we get,
Why doesn't the conceptual understanding of that situation break the trance?
because the conceptual situation is the trance. And we don't want to get rid of concepts. What happens is because we get fearful, because of dependent, because of this, as Nagarjuna talks about it in Praise of Dharmadhatu, the cage of our afflictions, our conditioning that has gotten us into this point. We have difficulty dealing with that without trying to stop it, or as if it's some separate situation, instead of seeing that we're not separate from that. You can actually be who you are. You can actually, isn't that pretty good news? I think so. You can actually be the afflictions you're trying to get rid of. If you do that, then there's no one else but that. Sokuzan.
Is an awakened being magnetized to the world in a way other than the three poisons?
They aren't even in it. They're in it physically. If it's a physical being, they're here, but they're also not here at all. And they're not somewhere else. More?
Is the bodhisattva vow some kind of magnetism?
The Bodhisattva vow is a way of relating to the world so that you can begin to understand that nothing is separate from anything else. Everything is dependently arisen. But that doesn't mean there aren't beings who are suffering, torturing each other. And so we're just not going to do that. Meet people in their confusion rather than try to get them to get rid of their confusion. Meet them in that. More?
What do you mean, meet them in their confusion? What does that look like?
Not meddling with them, but also not abandoning them. Don't take your eyes off from them. Don't take your senses away from anything in order to escape or get out of the confusion. Sometimes it's taught different ways where you actually go into the confusion. I would say meet them in the confusion rather than go in and barge in somebody's craziness with some kind of a mission to save them or something, even though that's part of the vow, to be with all things, save all beings. Part of that teaching sometimes says, which makes it sometimes confusing, that there are no beings to save. But we still need to do that because it's a relative context that we're in. So we need to work with that. In each, there's no one kind of teaching or sentence or comment or phrase that is going to work with everyone. That's why the teachings are broken up into so many different ways of expressing this.
It seems like even if I endeavor to just receive negativity, some of that leaks out. How can I relate to that inadvertent meddling?
Just watch it. It's always about awareness. It's never about stopping, starting, or meddling with it, or doing anything with it to twist it or bend it. You're already breaking the trance by just taking your everyday life and spending some time sitting down, holding still, and just watching the entrainment, watching the way the mind grasps, rejects, thinks, concludes, excludes, all the different relative situations. And they're fundamentally what it boils down to use that kind of it's not really a boiling, but eventually it's just the witnessing of it. It takes a while. And even the witnessing is extra, but then there's something behind the witnessing, just a way of talking about it. And at some point, the allegiance shifts over from the success and failure, 8 worldly dharmas in this world, to getting ahead, not falling behind, being protected, getting your way, getting success, getting accolades. It switches over to just the space itself, or awareness itself, or Buddha nature, awakened truth.
A question from Greg in the UK.
Yes.
Can you slip into a blank slate trance but still have some awareness around that?
Perhaps. I'm not sure exactly where the question is coming from. Perhaps. I mean, anything that you can say can show up and go away. But what is already the case can't show up. It's already the case. So it can't show up. It's being covered up by, the literal way of saying it, by the confusion that has ideas and opinions about anything. If you have any ideas and opinions about anything, it's, you're living in a pup tent. That gave you room to ask a question. It's thank you. It's a pup tent is something you think is true, and you're afraid to come out because you don't really want the truth, so you just stay inside your pup tent. It's your own beliefs and opinions and ideas.
So it's kind of like your comfort zone.
Nailed it. What? Hurry up, I haven't got much time.
Okay, we let it know. She said I was going to sneeze.
Okay. You can sneeze. I like that. That's you. I can't respond to that question.
How does the trance, the way that you're using it, create the illusion of separation?
Just because it's apparent, has some kind of a temporary continuity to pull us this way, pull it that way. And you notice when you're trying to figure something out that you actually deliberately go into some kind of a tunnel of figuring, calculating, understanding. Well, how about this? How about that? And we're weighing different things, trying to see. We're using the very nature of relative truth, which seems pretty solid, but just so does a dream. If you're in a dream, that seems pretty believable also. This is, as it is said in the Tibetan tradition, that the dream you had at night is a sample dream. This is the actual dream. This is the actual unreality. Different layers of it.
When you were talking to Sokuzan, you said don't meddle, but also don't abandon the situation. If I'm talking to someone that makes me uncomfortable, or if I'm watching something that makes me uncomfortable, I notice that I kind of drop my gaze or avert my eyes. Can we physically abandon one of our senses in a situation, but still not abandon the person? Or
I think that it gets pretty subtle, and it gets more and more subtle as we go on the path, as we practice year after year to try to understand more deeply what this is. We might find that we actually make the teachings our own, and we see that some people's visual consciousness is extremely powerful, and without a lot of, say, other kinds of consciousness, maybe conceptual awareness or sound. So sometimes we might find ourselves kind of customizing our own way of working with that. So I would say just proceed and just do it out of your awareness and your understanding of it, even though the kind of understanding is showing up as the feeling that you don't understand. That's also understanding. It might be the most profound form of understanding is to not really know. And this is why delusion and Buddha and awakening are not two different things. We keep looking for the success and get rid of the failure. Look for life and get rid of death. Look for anything, pleasure, and get rid of pain. Polarity.
if I notice myself shutting down in a particular sense or averting my eyes, would it be helpful to intentionally try to maintain eye contact or something like that?
Probably not, but maybe a little bit. It would depend on the situation. It would depend on your relationship to whatever that situation is already, how it's been going, to not leave anything out. It's always about the awareness of what's arising rather than what's arising. If there's an awareness of what's arising, then what is arising actually gets its information from everything else, because everything is dependently arisen. If you think you have thoughts, then that's going to create more difficulty. There's no thinker having thoughts. You receive thoughts. But don't believe a word I say.
You said you receive thoughts. Oftentimes thoughts seem to match up with current situations.
They do, depending on your reason. You can't have a, go ahead, you have more?
Where are thoughts received from?
Damn if
Who's
I know.
sending them? What's sending them?
The sender, you're sending them yourself. You're not separate from what's being created. Big responsibility. And it's not about blame. It's not about success or failure. It goes beyond all of that. That's the relative. This is why the world is full of situations where people are at war and won't take care of each other, won't help each other because they see an enemy somewhere else and a friend over here. If you see what this is, you won't have any enemies. You also won't have any friends. You won't see anything else but yourself everywhere. And it's not like, oh, I'm over there and I'm over there. Not over there as much as maybe it's because that person doesn't have as much money or something. You know, it's not, you're not specifying anything. More?
Nope.
That was easy. Further questions? Sokuzan.
Can we see the qualities of our trance?
I think so. We see that by practicing a lot. We begin to, sometimes it gets more and more difficult because we begin to see the very stuff we've been hiding out from, to use that same word, the entrainment of the trance that we've been believing certain things about our thoughts and our ideas and who we are and what life is about and values. And we think that's true. And then we start, because we have been practicing, going through an awareness practice, we're becoming more and more aware of the way in which that manifests and the way in which it's not true. We actually stop believing our thoughts. They don't go away. We just don't believe them like we did before. More?
Does the strength of that trance lessen?
Let's put it this way. It could, but as what you're looking at there, what you seem to be asking about is you won't care. You won't care. Your concern about something being this way and not that way starts to drop away. And that's why ego gets terrified, because it wants to have a relative, it needs to have some kind of am I doing okay? Am I doing this right? Is this good? Should I keep doing this? What's life about? What am I going to do? Those kind of worries. But if you actually understand what this is, the actual, to put it bluntly, the actual worrier vanishes. There isn't anyone to worry. Why would you worry about something that's always the case and yet never the case? Doesn't have any relative status. Has no, as a fancy word, no ontological status. It's not something.
Thinking about how you're talking about like thoughts with no thinker, I can think if like a song comes on the radio, maybe it's like heavy metal, it'd make me happy, but it'd make Junshi really mad or upset. So
it's like right and wrong.
yeah,
Which heavy metal song?
a good one. A good one. Fast.
Do you like his heavy metal music? No. What kind of music do you like?
Not that. Well, I like country music.
Okay, so what's the question?
So if there's no thinker behind the thoughts, it still seems like that situation would come up. It's the same situation that sparks two completely different responses.
Mm-hmm.
So
You should definitely arisen. It's just like an oak tree isn't jealous of an elm tree. I mean, it's just they're just different ways that phenomena appears. And sometimes as a human being, sometimes because of the causes and conditions that we come out of, meaning our parents, our culture, our life, we just get all enamored of some particular situation, or we get fearful and start to go to war. So there's the right and wrong is just extra.
So even if there's no thinker, are we still bringing something to the dynamic that we're interacting with?
Probably.
So if that's not a thinker, how can we have some kind of separated dynamic like that?
Confusion, delusion, ignorance, passion, aggression, ignorance, spinning around, thinking that you're in a straight line. If you see that it's circular, you probably aren't going to avoid it, nor will you jump on it, nor will you try to stop it or fight with it. More? Less?
I'm not very familiar with the 12 links, but it seems like there's a difference between
Get familiar.
it seems like there's a difference between that first input and then how we feel about it.
No.
So even if some of that
So you have feeling, and then you have what? Grasping? Are those the two?
Desire.
So you have feeling, and then you have desire, and then you have the desire to get away from it, which is this kind of grasping. And you have the desire to get more of it, which is this kind of grasping. Are you following me? Is he following me? So what's your question?
if the position on it, like I like it or don't like it, drops away or lessens and becomes less distinct from me versus another person, is there still some kind of subtle distinction? I would see something differently than somebody else.
Oh, sure. I think so. We're not trying to get rid of the distinctions, but it's the attachment or the fixation on right and wrong, the fixation on it. So of course you're gonna just because of dependent origination or causes and conditions, one thing is going to appeal to you more than say to someone else, but it doesn't mean that you're right and they're wrong. Particularly, we don't add on a bunch of extra things. You might enjoy a particular kind of music more than someone else. There's all the causes and conditions that arise to actually support that are untraceable. You might say, well, my dad likes that kind of music too, but that's kind of weak. There's so many. It's such an elaboration that the awareness going in there begins to see that the tributary streams are flowing through the darkness. You cannot trace it down. But what can you do? Just this. You can just be present. And it's not about a being present as so much as it is to see the way you keep missing your life by wanting something else, I don't want this, I like this, I don't like that, this shouldn't be. Why is this happening to me? You know how I know about this? Because I do it. And you don't have to stop doing that. So that's the astonishing thing. You don't have to stop having emotions or anger or irritation. I get irritated all the time. Ask her. I yell at the TV. We're not really loud. I'm just saying you don't have to be somebody else. You can actually be who you are, fundamentally. And you may find anger might taper off or it might get stronger. Jealousy, all the other poisons may come and go, but they can't find a person who's feeling that way. But that doesn't mean the feelings won't be there, but they don't happen to an individual person who needs protection or needs advancement or needs to get over themselves. More? Kuhn.
Does a trance always include polarity?
Seems like it. Sent you.
This space of not knowing feels really unrelenting to me and often really uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So I frequently am looking for feedback.
Mm-hmm. I'll give you some.
My question though is, should I back off on asking for feedback?
No, you shouldn't. Was that the feedback you're asking about? That's why you're not separate from the Buddha. That not knowing, just don't do anything with it. You don't have to fill it up with anything. You have to get anywhere. You don't have to accomplish it. You're basically talking about the nature of spiritual materialism is to want something else, to want to get somewhere. And you're very lucky because you don't know much. You follow me? That's why when I say you being a therapist, people are so lucky to come to you. I'm not just saying that. I'm just saying you're lucky to come to somebody who knows better than to meddle with them. Actually just receive. It's powerful.
Question from Susan in Traverse City.
Yes.
Does a bodhisattva stop short of Buddha mind to be of service to all sentient beings or come and go in awareness intentionally?
Yes. Is that a yes or no question?
I can't tell if it's a yes or no or either.
Well, I thought
or.
I'd start by saying that. If I understand what she's, Susan, what she's talking about or asking about, when that kind of thing occurs, then whatever you're needed, that's where you go. You might be the Buddha, you might be a first Bhumi Bodhisattva, you might be a Shravaka, you might be a Pratyeka Buddha, you might be a Hindu, you might be a Jain, you might have no religion, you might be a Christian, you might be a Muslim, doesn't matter. As if you're in the service of others, doesn't matter. Can show up any kind of way.
What is the difference between a bodhisattva and a mahasattva?
What about them?
Yeah, what's the difference?
One's big, one's little.
Which one is the bigger?
The Maha is the bigger one.
Okay.
You're welcome. Are we at the end of our sojourn? Final question? Oh, yes. Goes on. What are you hiding over there? Yes.
You use the word entrain,
Mhm.
and sometimes you say the train of thought, and don't board the train. And it seems like if there is a story, like a difference in opinion about music or a story about something, that's one thing. But it also seems like talking about the personal narrative, there's a train of that is not successive thoughts, but it's like a subliminal assumption from moment to moment of me. You know, how do you not board that train?
Just when I say don't board the train, I know you can't help doing that. I can't help it. Board on, get your ticket punched, sit down, and the next thing you know, you're off to Sudetenland or Tanambogo-Galutu, which is in the South Pacific, in case you wondered. And you're on the journey, but as soon as you see you're on the journey, you're back in the station. So it's just a matter of repetition. You don't have to come back, you're just back. As soon as you see that you've gone somewhere, you're back. You don't have to do anything else. You don't have to add on, there I go again. You don't have to add anything on. You can just be with that. It's like breathing. You breathe out, you breathe in. You breathe out, you breathe in. So when I say don't board the train, I know you can't help but do that. Don't, all the donut thoughts. You can't help it. But by doing that, you over time, or maybe a long period of time, maybe shorter, you see that you actually get an idea of how that works. And by not adding anything to it, like an opinion, a judgment, condemnation, or speculation or anything, you just see what happens, then that whole thing starts to slow down, and you see the train coming in, and you may get on, you may not. But if you get on, you do it for all beings. If you get off, you do it for all beings. Eventually you see you're not separate from anything, that there is no solid being. There isn't any. So therefore you're liberated. You can actually live your life moment by moment without interfering with anybody, without abandoning anybody, and by being with all things. More?
Does
Michael?
boarding the train for all beings shut down on self-centeredness?
Doesn't need to. There isn't any self. So you don't have to shut down on self-centeredness. You have to start somewhere, so that might be where we would start, is we start to get kind of embarrassed about how narcissistic or self-centered, how everything is always about me, and my stuff, my ideas, my successes, my failures. But if you continue to look at that, you see that that is unreal. You don't have to get rid of something that is unreal. More?
What's the difference between boarding the train for all beings and boarding it out of your self-centeredness?
Same. You knew that was coming. Don't look at me like that. It's when I say it's the same, I'm not trying to be difficult particularly. I'm just saying that when you see it, the very polarity that we see of craziness, insanity, Buddha nature and sentient beings, that those are not, they get their meaning from each other. It's such a simple idea. and yet it's astonishingly difficult to understand because we are in a physical being that seems so real. This seems so astonishingly real. When this body-mind goes back into the five elements, including the consciousness, not much is going to happen, other than to the people who are there seeing that happen. It might be a lot for them, but not for you. Yes?
What does it mean to serve others?
Don't meddle with them. Allow them to be, have their, I'm not saying you allow someone to pick your pocket or you allow someone to enter your house and your piano. You know, very simply put, if you're talking to somebody and they seem very confused and you're respectful of their difficulty, it's not that you wouldn't by saying, what can I hear what you're saying, but is there anything I can do to help you? You might say that. And they might say, no, I just wanted to complain to somebody. So you just be with them. They may want your help, they may not, but volunteering help based on your idea about what they should or shouldn't be doing is extra. Even though relatively speaking, you know, you can cite chapter and verse where you're absolutely correct about what you're telling them. That's extra. They might need to they need to not miss their life also. You can't awaken someone else. Even though I'm sitting up here encouraging people to see who they are, simply put. More.
Are we able to not meddle and also respect our own confusion?
Our own? I think that's where it starts. Stop trying to get better. It's a different, it's not that you wouldn't relatively in some way get better, less confusion, less jabbering at other people, more receiving what's happening to other people. But it wouldn't be it wouldn't show up as some kind of improvement project. Other people might think you're doing fine because you no longer are lecturing them or arguing with them or telling them what to do or what not to do. But you might just be responsible for your feelings. You might be able to just have your feelings without blaming anyone. Thank you.
If people complain to you a lot, are you a sucker?
You probably are. Excuse me. I understand what you're saying, and I don't think so. I think I sometimes say it this way: if somebody's complaining to you and you're listening, but it gets difficult for you to do it, or you feel like this probably isn't all that helpful to this person, and you just sit here and let them complain or whatever. And this is very, very specific to each person. I'm not giving any general advice that you should do this all the time, but maybe you should just excuse yourself and leave. If it's getting difficult for you to receive their negativity, you might just say, I got to get going. Something. There's nothing wrong with that. But while you're with them, as much as you can, just receive what's happening. You have to excuse me, I'm leaking. I think it was the squash I ate.
It's working.
It's working. Finally. Okay, thank you, my friends.
So we will go ahead and get set up for Orioki.